Hey everyone, it is great to have you. We'll get started in just a couple minutes as we wait for folks to join, but so happy that you are all here for this one. It's going to be great. And for everyone that just joined, we'll be starting up in a minute or so. Just give folks a chance to settle in.
Jeremy, how are we doing?
We're doing well. You want to kick us
Great.
off?
Sure. I'm also I'm excited to grill you on a case as opposed to being on the receiving end for once. So it's gonna be a real pleasure. Okay, so for everyone who's joined so far, I'm excited to have you, especially if you've joined us for a couple prior sessions. Our hope is that not only is this something that can just help you in and of itself, but that also builds on and is complementary to prior sessions. We are trying to focus you here on improving like your general casing toolkit. All of the individual discrete skills can sometimes be overwhelming when they're tossed in amid the context of cases which may have unfamiliar terminology, may be challenging in and of themselves. So we're trying to help you come up with a way to just broaden the way that you think about case prep and also fine tune specific skills. Also, we'll just add that you can sign up for Leland quickly using the QR on the top right. That's just a great way to get your hands on a number of resources. For those of you who've heard this before, who've already seen some of these events, just a ton of internal stuff that I highly recommend you look at, and that Jeremy and I, as we've talked about before, like kind of wish that we had earlier on in our careers as well. So with that, let's keep moving.
Yeah, let's do it. Just a note, if you're willing to turn on your camera and you have a camera, we would love to have you here live with us. So we'll introduce ourselves. Ben, you want to go first as you are on the left part of the page?
Yes, of course. Even though we're 1.5 years, meaning right to left. So I think between the two of us, we've introduced ourselves a couple of times. I went to WashU undergrads where I met Jeremy initially, did McKinsey after that, then worked for the mayor of Chicago doing policy work and some speech writing, and then went to Stanford for business school. I grew up in Queens, for those of you who are from the area, so big shout out to Queens. And right now I'm running a chess startup. So any questions on all those things, more than happy to field, especially afterwards.
Cool. I am Jeremy. Some of my path is similar to Ben's. We both went to WashU, as he mentioned. That's where we met. We're case buddies. We went through this whole process together, and if it wasn't for having one another in it, I don't think we would both have gotten to the firms that we were at. So shout out for having good case buddies. It matters a lot, and good coaches as well. So I went to Bain after WashU, which was where I spent 4 years of my career, got an MBA from MIT Sloan, and now I do a bunch of freelancing work. And as you probably note from our bullet points here, both of us were interview trained by our firms. So this session is exciting for us to deliver some of those, what we're looking for and tactical things to all of you. So let's march on. We're going to cover 3 main topics today. We'll cover the core 4 skills of casing, which for those of you who haven't cased so far, totally cool. These are essentially the foundational skills and things you see over and over again in casing that are important to master. Then we're going to talk a little bit about mastering the case process, meaning the prep process, and how we recommend the 2 of us, as we did many years ago, casing with each other, what we really recommend to get into top casing shape. And then we'll just have some Q&A where we'll answer your questions before we head out. Anything to add, Ben?
No, it sounds perfect.
All right, cool. So the case has 4 primary skills. When we boil it down, there's setting up the framework, which is when you're given a case prompt, you're asked to lay out how you'd approach it. And a lot of people see the framework as a time to memorize a bunch of stuff and then figure out what they need to say and then deliver it. Ben and I both take a different approach here. We advise having a custom framework for each case that you do, and to think about it more through a lens of, I'm about to have a conversation with someone, what things would be interesting for us to explore in figuring this out. And by the way, is my video spotty, Ben?
You're great.
All right, cool. Second piece, a second sort of skill set that's crucial is market sizing in math. I know that everyone here has taken math classes, whether in high school, in a university. Case math is not as advanced as those typically, but it is still complicated and challenging because you're asked to do it in a short amount of time with just a pen and paper. And even for people like me who studied math, there's a tendency to get ahead of ourselves and it's easy to lose track of zeros and stuff. So a deceptively difficult part of the case that is very masterable though with practice. Creative brainstorming, and we're going to go more in depth on all of these. Creative brainstorming is really how can you think of many ideas for a given question? How can a company grow? How can a company cut costs? How can you creatively, with structure at the same time, deliver an interesting answer? And then finally, the recommendation, which is the wrap up of the case and leaving your interviewer with an idea of where you would want them to go if you were advising.
Yeah, super.
Cool.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. You want to take this away, Ben?
Yeah. So when it comes to frameworks, I think again the biggest myth out there is, and I think folks like Victor Chang had a good reason for developing these types of things initially, A, for commercial purposes, but B, because a lot of people would approach cases without any structure. But I think a lot of folks typically over-index on providing. They come in with prescribed frameworks and things like that. It's just not the way to do it. The cases these days, especially for MBB firms, are intentionally designed so that you can't just come in with the 4 C's, the 3 P's. Me and Jeremy always joke about this, but I literally still don't know what they are. I've never looked into it, never really particularly cared. They are not useful for an interesting intellectual discussion that involves nuance and ambiguity. What they are useful for is the same thing that the area of a triangle formula is useful. It's extremely discrete use cases that are really, really easy to work through that you might see in a class, but which you won't see on interview day. Another thing that is related is robotic-ish answers. Use common sense in your initial frameworks. Think about how the solutions that you offer are going to actually play out. Are they realistic? Do they make some sense? Are they implementable? If we're talking about we did a case session before this, we talked about an Olympic, whether a city should consider hosting the Olympics and what the criteria might be for doing that. If you just offhandedly go, oh yeah, they should just put the infrastructure in place to make that happen. It's okay, well, that's a massive assumption. That would be a relatively robotic and technically true thing, but saying something like we can put 5 stadiums in the ground and redo our highways in 6 months is probably not realistic. In terms of the last thing tip-wise, which I think comes from a lot of practice as well, at least for me, I used to take forever on frameworks, is actually taking the 60 seconds and stuff to walk through. walk through your interviewer, and as you do more and more of this, you'll be able to develop, although I still haven't fully developed it, but you'll be able to develop an ability to both be concise and also still structured and have dense sentences that carry a lot of weight and which cover key categories. Anything you'd add here, Jeremy?
Sounds good. I think we're ready to jump into some live demo action. So for each of the 4 case elements, we're going to do a little live demo so you get to see what good looks like. Hopefully good. Maybe we'll stumble. That's all right too. For this first one, I'm going to throw a prompt at Ben, and you'll get to see what a quality answer here looks like. You ready for it?
I am. Don't bury me. Okay. All right. Let's
All right. I'll do my best. So your friend owns a pizza restaurant in New York City and is considering opening another location in the same city. What should your friend consider in making this decision?
Oh, and then this is the part of the case where you say something like, "Hey, do you mind if I take like a minute or so to think through this type of thing," which I am doing.
Yep. And yeah, Ben is doing this live. Like we are not. He doesn't have like a script.
Yeah, which I'm now realizing like it would be a little easier if you had like given me a heads up, but okay. All right, I'm gonna spitball a few things, but I think first and foremost, there's probably 3 or 4 main buckets I'd want to look at. The first, in trying to figure out if we want to open a second location or a second pizza restaurant, is really just the investment required. What will be needed for us to break even? How much revenue we expect to generate from a top line perspective? Potentially our existing location, and then potentially indexing it relative to, let's say, the population or the consumer base of the new location we're intending to open up. In terms of the cost side of that calculus, I want to understand like what's the actual real estate investment required. What are the potential new distribution elements that we need to take into account? Trucking, shipping, actually getting the materials we need to make, let's say the pizza that we're going to make or the other foods that we're going to make into the store. So kind of a classic profitability analysis bottom line is something I'd want to look at first and foremost. Secondly, I'd want to understand perhaps like kind of call it like internal capabilities, but like personnel especially. Do we actually have the raw materials, so to speak, to make this happen? Are we able to staff this restaurant regularly? Are we able to actually get boots on the ground and get the people that we need to get the things that we need into the actual restaurant? So I think that's a pretty important piece of this from a logistics standpoint. 3, I would say a third bucket is just competition. Where are we opening this up? Is this in a new city? Is this in a new country? Is this down the block? Who are we going up against? And potentially how does our brand stack up to the competing brands that we'll be going up against? Other risks I would just want to identify quickly before jumping into any kind of next steps, because in terms of next steps, I would definitely want to start with the initial profitability calculus. Just some risks are, you're running a full pizza shop right now. Like that is a highly intensive operation. Do you actually have what it takes to be both running your business as it is right now and maintain its effectiveness while also trying to scout out and then set up a new location? So that's, I think, a natural risk. And then 2 is I think the biggest risk I would say, in addition to that, is brand. Like where we are now, we may be well recognized, maybe we are, maybe we aren't. But if we're moving to an entirely new location, your brand strategy may change entirely, and you may have no footprint or recognition there. So I'll stop there. I'd probably start with the profitability, but that's my initial take.
Nice, awesome, super well done. That was
Let's go. All right, guys. Actually, it's been like 47 cases we've done together, and I finally keep going. Sorry.
I save the hard feedback for when we're not on the camera. Okay. No, I'm kidding. I give honest feedback, and this was good for a few reasons, which I'll just highlight really quickly. First, starting with the last thing, is he recommended, all this stuff he laid out, where to go next. At the end, you'll notice he was like, of all this stuff, I recommend we start with profitability because it's the most important. Second is that Ben was conversational there. Like a lot of people, when they go into framework mode, they become very, like, as we said on the slide, like robotic or overly like structured and not, they lose their like human element. It was just a conversation of here interesting things we should look at. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I think maybe other things is I actually had buckets, which is sometimes I fail to have. I just kind of have these like giant like amalgams of ideas that are connected and make sense and maybe individually are good ideas, but they aren't necessarily segmented in any kind of logical way. So I feel like I accidentally landed there. That said, all things considered, I probably missed a bucket. You know what I mean? Like I probably didn't include some things. Like if you were to think about this for another minute, you'd come up with some other ideas. But hopefully that was helpful. Do we want to stop for any quick questions? Does that make sense, Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, we're going till 45 after the hour. So if anyone's got like one question here, we're happy to field it as we go, and then we'll move on.
Yes. And I'll start with answering, I think, Annie's, which is a good question.
Okay.
Did you mention risks in your framework or in your recommendation? Think about risks as like the footnotes or the asterisks or the things that you want to make sure that you include, which aren't necessarily, buckets or categories you want to investigate as a hypothesis on their own. But, if you want to present a case for something or an argument for something, one of the strongest things you can do is identify the counter arguments or identify the things that can undermine your assumptions or ultimate hypothesis. So I think laying that out for your interviewer and not presenting your framework like it's definitively correct, both goes a long way from the human side of things, and also is just straight up accurate and something you're going to have to do no matter what case you're on. Because if everything I say is true, and it turns out that, for example, this pizza shop is going into like Pizza Hut's hub, and we'll have no chance, and nobody will know our brand, like that could undermine the entire operation itself. So if you're actually realistically doing this, it's risks are always part of it.
Cool. Let's trudge on. So market sizing and math. The main things to keep in mind here, in addition to what we mentioned earlier, are you're going to be getting a lot of numbers potentially, and it's easy for them to get lost and misaccounted for and lost track of on your page or in your head. Is to stay organized and to keep your interviewer totally in tune with what you're doing. This should feel it should feel uncomfortable at first, because we're not used to, at least when I started doing casing, I wasn't used to narrating my math. I would do my math on paper by hand or on the computer, and I would get an answer, then I would share it. But with casing, you want to take your interviewer through every step you're doing. The small exception here is if you have just like a multiplication thing or something like that, you can say, can I have 20 seconds to just crack this one and I'll get back to you, rather than being like I'm multiplying 1 by 2 and 2 by 3. But generally, you want them to know where you are. Also, with the math, second bullet here is what I'm going to talk to now, is sense checking your answers. I one time was interviewing, when I was at Bain, I was interviewing somebody, and they said there were 8 billion seats in a football stadium. And I'm sure that this was an unbelievably, intelligent individual, but sometimes in the context of the case, we just get a little bit lost and forget what we're actually solving. And so the invitation here is to just keep your eye out for things that, what looks unusual. Does this make sense? Like, can there possibly be like 3 trillion pieces of pizza sold in a restaurant in a year? Probably not. Can there be 1 piece of pizza sold? Also probably not. So it's probably somewhere in between. And then putting your answer into context. Once you actually get a number, important to give the interviewer some sense of what it means in relation to the case, the key questions, the framework you laid out, and the answer that you're eventually trying to get to. Anything to add on the tips, Ben?
I would absolutely love to lean in, especially I think Samson had a great point in the chat, which is related to what we're talking about. And thank you for volunteering your own interview experience, because I also had my interview experience. But I think perhaps one thing that went well in my case is that I actually was my first round interview with McKinsey. I was doing the math completely wrong in my first case. And I saved myself because it was a completely logical case. It was about, shipping. I think I told Jeremy this, like shipping boxes and like trying to calculate the actual surface area of the boxes. And I started doing, like more or less like a length time width time height calculation and like figuring out okay, like what's actually going on here, how many boxes, multiplying it together. And my interviewer stopped me and she goes, "Huh, that's interesting. I have a very different number. Can you tell me why you did length time width and height?" And I'm like, "Actually, that makes complete sense. I'm supposed to be calculating the surface area of the boxes. What I was calculating was everything except the surface area. Literally the inverse. I was calculating the volume of the box." So we ended up solving it. We ended up talking it through and kind of noticing my own error. She told me afterwards was actually the strongest point of all the cases she had seen that day, which was actually being able to rebound, keep your composure, and then not only admit your mistake, but then go back and correctly like assess it and move forward. Because honestly, that happens all the time. Like anyone who's worked with consultants know that they get things wrong sometimes. And I think being able to like step back and be like, hey, like, all right, like the way we were analyzing this was ABC. Let's do ABC prime and like do a slightly different approach or adapt what we're doing. I think it goes a long way. So let's keep rolling here.
Cool. All right,
So
time for you to.
I get to torture you. I get to torture you. Okay, cool. So I think a logical next step in this, even within this same case, investigating a new location, etc. Let's say our new, we're a pizza shop and we're located somewhere, let's say in Chicago, but we're trying to expand into New York. One thing I would want to know is like how many slices of pizza do you think are sold in New York City every year?
Yeah, great question. So it's essentially like the size of the pizza market in New York,
more or less, and it's a topic of heated debate between Chicago and New York. So I think we should settle. Probably
I bet. Although I hear there are slightly different types of pizza, but we'll focus on the New York.
No,
New York.
The pizza market in Chicago is actually zero because there isn't any real pizza there. So let's keep going.
We see which side you're on. So the way I would think about this is I'm just taking a moment to gather my thoughts here. When I think about the pizza market, I think of 4 different types of consumers of pizza. We've got our whole population of New York, but they're not all the same. That population, some of them don't have any pizza. Those are, maybe some people who are like health conscious or just don't like it. Then you've got people in the middle who eat some pizza, and then pizza lovers who eat a lot of it. So the way I'm thinking about approaching this one is to break the market down into different types of pizza eaters, estimate how many people, given the total population, fall into each of those categories, and then estimate how many slices per year or per week or per day, whatever I end up choosing, how much pizza those groups all eat, and then figure out what the market is from there. Do you agree with that approach?
I think so. I ultimately think though it'll hinge on like what we end up assuming for the size of each of those sub buckets anyway. So I'm more like, I'll agree with your buckets, but I kind of want to see what you do with them.
Cool. So I know, just because I'm in New York and I've heard this elsewhere, there are 8 million people or so in New York. So I'm going to make that assumption to start. And I'm going to split my population of 8 million down into 4 buckets. People who eat no pizza, people who eat some, people who eat a lot, and people who are pizza lovers. I'm going to assume 25% of people eat no pizza. I'm in that category. I know plenty of other people who are, and I think that there are a good number of people who that's the case for.
Let's pause. Who do we think doesn't eat pizza? Like when you're 25%, like where are you deriving that from?
Yeah, this is like health conscious people and people who just don't like it for whatever reason.
Or maybe like little kids, like young, people who are below the age of 6, or like really very old or something like that.
Okay. Yeah, people who can't eat it, or older people who have dietary restrictions.
Sure, sounds good.
Cool. The next category is going to be people who eat some pizza, and these folks. So obviously the people who eat none, it's 0. I'm assuming 0 slices per week. For this group, which I'm saying is 40% of the population, it's around 2 slices per week. Maybe they have it on a weekend after they're with friends.
I'm in that group.
Cool. Yeah. Ben is in the some pizza group.
Sure.
So we've accounted for us in both the categories so far. So we're about to go into uncharted territory. There's another group of people who eat a lot of pizza. I'm saying 30% of folks. These people are eating around 5 slices per week. And I think this group exists because a lot of people can eat 5 slices in like, a single sitting, or they're having a slice every day for lunch. Then finally, the pizza lover group. These folks are having 10 slices a week. It's 5% of the population. They're not a very common breed, but they exist.
I agree with that. I think that breakdown's pretty good. Can you use 10 million for New York City? Because I think that's the actual number, and also because it's easier.
Yeah, I can use 10 mil. So what I'm going to do first is to get to a annual pizza eaten for each of these people in the group. So in the no pizza group, they have none per year. In the some pizza group, those people are having 100 slices per year, given the 2 per week. I'm assuming 50 weeks. And then for the a lot of pizza group, they're having 250 slices a year. And for the pizza lover group, they're having 500 a year. And so now that I know how much pizza each of these groups is having per year on a slice basis, I am going to find out how many people are in each of these groups. So given the 10 million, 25% of the population eats no pizza, that's 2.5 mil. I'm just writing that down, literally going through this as we go.
We can calculate which bucket do you think is going to be the biggest bucket in total volume.
Yeah, the biggest bucket is in total volume. So the same bucket is 8x the number of people of the lover bucket, or the sum bucket's 8x the number of people. And then the lover bucket is 5x the number of slices. So the biggest by volume is going to be the sum pizza. And that bucket has 4 million or 4 mil people. The allotted pizza has 3 million people, and the pizza lover bucket has 500,000 people.
Have a very, very enjoyably eaten slices of pizza. Yeah.
Say it again.
Just keep going. Keep going.
All right, cool. So now we're calculating total slices eaten. The no pizza group, obviously this one's been super fun because it's easy. There's no pizza being eaten there. 4 million times 100, that is going to be 400 million for the sum pizza group. 3 million times 250 is going to be 750 million. And then in the pizza lover group, we've got 500 slices for 500,000. That is going to be 250 million. And that sums up to 1.4 billion slices per year. And if
one more time.
Yeah, 1.4 billion slices total.
Okay, if I told you that the number of slices of pizza, so I like the framework overall. I think it makes complete sense. Percentages, people get it's fantastic.
Yeah.
If I told you that the actual number is 3 billion, which assumption or assumptions would you be most inclined to tweak in order to arrive at a number that is actually correct?
Yeah, I think I might have undercalled the amount of pizza these people were eating per week, especially these pizza lovers. There could be people eating 4 slices a day, maybe. And so that puts like some percent of the population into like a very high category.
I disagree. I think actually you've potentially overestimated the zero bucket and potentially underestimated the number of quantity, the amount of slices that the sum bucket eats.
Yeah.
I think week one thing, I would slightly increase the sum bucket's pizza slice. Yeah.
I agree with you. I agree with you that the sum bucket is probably where the issue is. It's the sum and the allot bucket, because these buckets have so much of the population in them that a small change in those will have a big change on the end. So for example, even if we were to just increase the sum bucket to 4 slices a week, that would flow through with a big difference on the end of this calculation. Like that alone would probably bring it somewhere around like 2.2 billion.
Got it.
Maybe not 2.2, but like 2.
I think our number is still super low, which is amazing. But I wanted to just like see what you would think in terms of like assumption tweaking. What other number could be wrong? Or actually rather forget that. What if you could go at this from a different direction in terms of market sizing entirely, what would you do?
Yeah, that's a good question. Do you mind if I take 10 seconds to consider that?
You can take 15.
All right, I'm gonna take 12 and a half. So another way that we could do this is we could estimate it from more of a, I don't know if this is top down necessarily, it's just like a different bottoms up version. We could estimate the number of pizza shops in Manhattan.
Okay.
Based on like knowing how much space Manhattan takes up and estimating like pizza places per block or whatnot, and then have an estimate for each of these pizza places of how much pizza they're selling.
Or just one. Maybe extrapolate it outwards. Maybe like an average pizza place and could extrapolate.
Exactly. Yeah, we just have like an average. We'd know the total number of pizza places, average pizza they sell, and then figure out how much they're selling in New York total.
Fun. The average American eats an average of 46 slices of pizza every year. Isn't that incredible?
So that's like 1 per week.
Yeah. Roughly. So, and that's not even the average New Yorker. So just a fun just a fun exercise. By the way, what we just did there, that wasn't just me teasing Jeremy. That's like actually the kind of dialogue you would have in a case. Like especially a partner round case where they know you can do math. They've already seen you do a case. You've been successful. They want to understand, can you make a set of assumptions, go forward, and then ultimately reevaluate them on the fly and sense check yourself. Okay, I think we've got this. Yeah.
Yeah, we're there. We're there. Cool. Creative brainstorming. You want to take this one?
Yes. I think that the biggest, I'll try to move this pretty quickly since we've got about 15 minutes left. But I would say that the most important stuff for creative brainstorming is like actually coming up with ideas that relate back to the initial question. And that could be used to further or invalidate a hypothesis. And if you're not doing that, don't include them. If we're talking about a case on whether or not it makes sense to open a pizza shop, don't start telling me about trucking in Zimbabwe. It's not. Focus on the actual distribution networks that are local, and stay focused on the actual question at hand. So I think that's really important. But I also think like there's a couple techniques that I use specifically that I think will really, really high yield for me. One is when I'm thinking especially about like a consumer facing business, thinking like, let's say we're selling like a product that you or I might buy every day. Try to imagine yourself going through the purchasing process, the user journey, the customer journey, and working backwards from there to come up with key factors that you would care about in terms of buying a particular product. I always found that strategy of just like imagining the user walking through a day, experiencing the business or experiencing the product, and evaluating it as a really, really high yield exercise. Another one I also found in terms of like creative brainstorming, but also applying a little bit of structure or technique, is supply chain imagination. So we're just talking about a pizza shop. Like step back for a second when you're thinking about what it takes to open a pizza shop and ask yourself, what does it take to make pizza? In general, what do I actually need? What are the ways it takes for me to actually get the pizza and the raw materials into the store? Who are all the people and what are all the pieces of equipment I need to make the pizza shop run? What are the things I would care about that would make my pizza shop stand out from others? Those techniques, I think, especially supply chain, I think especially user journeys are great ways to just like generate ideas on the fly. Especially like if you were in my shoes when I was in a partner on interview from McKinsey, I had my interviewer of my initial framework ask me 5 straight times after I came up with a framework and 3-4 ideas. What else? What else would you consider? What else? Okay, those are good ideas. Give me another one. Give me another one. And I was like, geez. But that I think those techniques I think played a huge part in me getting through those kinds of situations. Okay, examples.
Awesome. Yeah, quick. Let's do a quick example here. So, Ben, what are the top 5 things you would advise your friend who's considering opening the second pizza shop to do to ensure a successful launch?
Okay, top 5 things.
Yep.
First and foremost, I would want to make sure I have the people that I can quickly staff to run this pizza shop. 2, I would uncover the financial arrangements in order to like figure out whether or not this investment makes sense and how much it costs for us to get the pizza shop's lights on, get the equipment up and running, and get the stuff in the store. 3, I want to make sure I have the distribution networks that are required to make this happen. So we're literally talking about like shipment, literally just talking about like actually like, do we have the supply network in order to, and vehicles literally to transport either from a plant or wherever, or literally in some cases like rolled dough into our store. 4th, I want to make sure that we can actually develop some sort of brand or media presence. Depending on whether we already have a brand, we could advertise at our current store, our new store's location. We could figure out new ways to advertise like social media, things like that. That's something I'd want to understand in terms of differentiation. And then 5, I mean, that's actually related to competitive positioning, but I think 5, I'd want to see, like I'm running out of ideas already. I'm trying to imagine like what it would take to like actually walk into, like if I were a customer and I was walking into a pizza store, like what are the types of things I'd want to consider? I'd also want to understand like what the culture of the city or the area I'm opening is like. And if there's any other like co-events or partnerships I might be able to create with like the specific area or region that I'm in order to both better advertise and get our name out there, but also to like have a face and put a face to the name for the community we're going to end up being part of. So those are 5.
solid. We're gonna keep rolling.
You really can tell that we haven't prepared these things. We only knew like a few of these things,
Yeah.
but like actually I wanted to show you there as well. Like it's actually challenging. It takes reps to like be able to just like 5 ideas on the fly about a random topic you haven't thought about before. So don't underestimate.
Just
Okay.
one tip there before we move on. I usually encourage people to be people are very naturally, at least who I work with, narrow-minded in their thinking and think they're thinking it, if I say this idea, it's too outrageous, but I'm like, pretty much no idea is going to be too outrageous. Here, it's called creative brainstorming for a reason. So bring the creativity. Okay, cool. Recommendation. So the good news with the recommendation is that it's somewhat standard across cases, at least the way that we advise people, in your shoes and the way that we delivered our recommendations when we were interviewing. There's a formula that I recommend people follow, because what you're trying to do is convey, you understand what just transpired on the case, and you have a recommendation that both makes sense and you're thinking about on a larger scale going forward. So that includes, stating upfront right away, what do you recommend? Clearly, without wavering. Second thing is giving supporting points. Why do you recommend this? What support do you have from the work you just did in the case? And then listing off 2 to 4 risks and 2 to 4 next steps to show that you think about both sides of it and to give some ideas going forward. In this phase of the case, expect to get challenged. You might hear the interviewer say something like, I don't agree with that. I don't see it the same way. And then challenge either the rationale you gave or the whole thing to begin with. And so be prepared for that. The name of the game here is not to get flustered and not to act like you know the answer unequivocally, but to have a conversation with them about what they're giving you. Does the feedback make sense? Is it reasonable? Do you actually have grounds to change your recommendation? But be firm at the same time, willing to change your mind. Anything to add there, Ben?
No, I think that's great. I think remember this is another good place to include risks and some priorities and next steps after your framework or after your final recommendations. Yes.
Cool.
Are we doing one? Okay. Given all the factors we've considered, Jeremy, suppose I told you we'd be able to break even in 2 years, and that we'd be able to have a reasonable brand image and be somewhat differentiated from the existing pizza market in the New York City location. What would you recommend? Both, should we open this pizza shop, and also what would be your 2 biggest factors you'd want to consider immediately to better evaluate the opportunity?
Got it. Okay, awesome. I'm going to take this one pretty quickly. I think we should open it, given a few things. Market's big. New York pizza market is giant, as we just saw. It's 1.4 billion slices per year, as I estimated, 3 billion per year, as you told me it might be closer to. That's a lot of pizza. I know there are a lot of pizza shops in New York, but I'm convinced that with the right brand, we can find a slice of that market. No pun intended. I would also add an additional reason that I'm recommending opening it is because 2 years to pay back the investment and break even, that's super reasonable. That means that within 2 years, we're already making money. And finally, the differentiation factor. That is something that matters here. There are pizza shops are a dime a dozen. If we're differentiated, that's a positive sign going forward. I would say the risks to doing this, and to answer your second question, the 2 biggest factors that I would want to understand further are what the investment is going to look like, and do we have the capabilities of actually executing this? We know we're going to be able to pay that investment back in 2 years, so that makes me feel comfortable. But I would really want to know, do we have someone here who's going to run the second shop? Do we have the capital to deploy to open it? Those 2 things are important. And then also, what part of town are we going to open in? From living in New York, I think I can say for sure that there are different areas of the city, and our pizza shop might do great in one and not so great in another. So I'd want to know those. And those are also the next steps that I would take to go hunt down those answers. I would come to New York, check out the area, start to do some research on our internal, resources, people, financials, and figure out if this makes sense.
Nice. That's a really good recommendation, because he answered my damn question. He provided me those 2 next step areas, and he identified a few risks or hedges that he'd want to consider. So all of that's great. And that's really right there is how you do it. Let's close out with some mastery. And I think maybe Erica will drop me like a DM or something just to see if we have a few extra minutes, but definitely want to just hit this. Do you want me to take the slide and you can just jump in?
Go for it. Yeah.
Cool. If you want to crush cases, stop reading them, do them. What Jeremy and I just did is the actual work. That's what's actually hard. And if you just saw, like, Jeremy and I have done countless cases, but it was still relatively challenging for us. We've literally interviewed people and it's still not particularly easy. If you want to have a good shot at getting an MBB offer, or just honestly an offer at any consulting firm you've heard of, you really need to be hitting at least like 30 cases live beforehand to just like raise your odds to a really good place. It is hard and it takes a lot of practice, and you'll learn the rhythms of the case, how to communicate, how to structure your thoughts, how to do discrete skills like mental math, a lot more intuitively if you just step in the arena and do them. Secondly, I would say if you struggle with a particular area, isolate it and tackle it, just the same way you would do with anything else. If you're poor at mental math, I was initially weak at walking my interviewer through my math. What I did was I did a lot of like calculate the tip on the check question, but I would do those equivalent things throughout my day, and I would do them aloud if I could. Be like, all right, would this make sense if I heard it? Another great time when working with somebody aloud actually allows you to get feedback, and they can be like, hey, you got the wrong answer and I don't know how you got there, or you got the right answer and I don't know how you got there, or you got the wrong answer, but I know how you got there, so I can help you fix it and work through it like it happened to me on my interview day. Learning business, terminology, concepts, that type of stuff happens by reading a lot of books on business, doing things that are related in your work and your academics. I think that's helpful. Reading the paper, read Business Insider, read Forbes, read the Wall Street Journal. Try to understand the commercial angles and logics behind things and why people are actually making decisions, as opposed to just reading headlines. Read articles. And then I think the last stuff is when you are actually doing case practice, focus first on the highest likelihood cases. Nail profitability until you get it. That's a case you are absolutely going to get in some form or another at every single company that you interview for. So start there, get really good at it, and maybe move into some product launch, new market entry type cases, and then maybe do a private equity case or an advising case or some other slightly more esoteric concepts that can stretch your thinking and kind of advance your repertoire a little bit should you get that kind of thing on case day. Last thing, stylistic. Expect to be interrupted, expect to be pressure tested, expect to be told you might even be wrong when you're analyzing. Stay open-minded, keep your composure. And again, one of the biggest things you can do through practice is getting used to that. And frankly, when you're giving cases to someone else, doing that yourself will allow you to adopt that mindset. And frankly, understand that come interview day, it really is just a dialogue and you're really just trying to get to a better answer together. And I think that really is powerful for practice. Anything you want to add here, Jeremy, or next slide, potentially?
You crushed it. I say we jump to some Q&A. We've got a time for maybe a question or two here. I saw a good one just come up in the chat, so we'll start there. Thank you, Sanjana, for this one. Do they typically ask profitability, market entry, M&A style cases during the final round, or do they choose more non-general cases? That's a good question. I'll take a first hack at it. You're much more likely to see these very standard cases in the first round, and in the partner round, which is the same as the final round, those cases out of left field are much more common. For instance, you might get a case pretend you're the CEO of your favorite company. What would you advise that CEO to do? That doesn't really fit into any of the buckets, but it doesn't mean you won't see these classic categories later on. It just means that they'll feel slightly different. They'll be a little bit more open-ended. They'll be a little bit more ambiguous, and you'll get challenged in different ways than you would in a first round. So it's stylistic more than anything. Ben, anything to add on that one?
No, that's perfect. I just answered Megan's question in the chat. I suggest people take a look. Last question, Jason Park, are group cases different? I have no idea. I don't think there's going to be any group cases for any major firm that I've seen, so don't worry about that. It's the Wharton MBA interview is the only thing I know that does something like that.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Maybe one last quick question. But guys, I thank you for engaging. For the few folks of you that were on video, really do appreciate it. The head nod, the small engagement, it actually goes a long way because Jeremy and I don't like talking to an iPad or a computer screen. So appreciate that. Jorge, how would you recommend tackling written cases? They're a pretty minority thing. I would say put in the same kind of effort you would to a normal case with a little bit more time and diligence, and maybe do some research if it's called for.
Yeah.
So Awesome, guys. Thank
Appreciate
you
you
guys.
having you all here.
All right, take it easy. Hope you enjoy the future Leland sessions as well. If you guys are attending, I really couldn't recommend it more highly. Former colleague at McKinsey of mine, Missy, and I have another session in about an hour and change. So feel free to join us there too. And thank you again, Jeremy. Like, also, you're the only one who do real math live. So